Hello, we finally have reached the fourth Sunday of Advent. Today we hear from what is us is a familiar story, the meeting between Mary and Elizabeth, and the joyful sound of Mary's song, My soul magnifies the Lord. It is a beautiful story, interwoven with many other stories against the backdrop of the greatest story of God's people of Israel. There's the story of Elizabeth about to bear a child, despite her age and her earlier inability to conceive. The story of youthful Mary, whose unborn child is also unexpected and unplanned by his mother. There's the story of John, born to be the messenger spoken of by the prophet Isaiah, who would prepare the way of the Lord. And of Jesus, born to be the Lord, whose coming has long since been foretold by the prophets of Israel. These are the stories which we read of Zechariah and Joseph, men and fathers who fade into the background as John and Jesus follow their own destiny. Today, though, the story centres on two mothers, women who have such different experiences of bearing sons, but who both know that their sons are destined in some way to fulfill God's purposes for his people through suffering. Today is only about joy, though, the excitement and the awe of two women whose children, it seems, know each other already, two women whose faith led them to say yes to God. All generations will call them blessed, and we are one of those generations. What does their story mean for us today? Mary and Elizabeth hold within their bodies and within their hearts and minds God's promise of new life, of justice and mercy. If ever there was a time in this world when we needed that new life, justice and mercy, then surely this is it. We could listen to the familiar stories of Christmas without getting too involved in them. Or we could say yes to God and become part of those stories, part of the bigger story of God's people from generation to generation. God may not ask us to lead his people out of slavery or to bear a child for him, but he might ask us to do something which could be more difficult for us. He might ask us to be more loving in our lives, to think before we condemn people who are different from us, and then to be more patient and tolerant of those people. To think before we shut someone out of our lives, and then seek reconciliation when we fall out with friends and relatives. To think before we assume the worst of people, and then try thinking the best of them. To think before we criticize and judge, and then to offer praise and encouragement instead. To pray for the needs of others, and then to be part of God's answer to that prayer. Only I know what God is asking of me this Advent and Christmas, and only you know what he's asking of you. What Mary tells us is that he looks on her with favour, on the lowliness of his servant, that his mercy is for those who fear him, and that he remembers his mercy and fulfills the promises that he makes. I hope and pray that when we say yes, and perhaps because we can say yes to whatever it is God is asking of us, we will also be able to say with Mary, My soul magnifies the Lord. The Lord has done great things for me. Holy is his name.